Welcome back to the Information Week CIO Corner. I'm Senior Editor Jean-Pierre Ruth. The CIO Corner is a one-on-one conversation with CIOs, CTOs, and other C-suite tech leadership about their challenges, strategies, and interests. And today I'm joined by Michael Manos, CTO of Dun Bradstreet. Now, Dun Bradstreet is a name that carries legacy. And sometimes an organization with more than 180 years, Michael definitely correct me on this, more than 180 years of history can mean challenges in meshing what has been tradition with innovation. So Michael, definitely looking forward to hearing about, what is your approach, not only in terms of maintaining internal tech infrastructure, but, how you go about exploring ongoing moves towards modernization. So Michael, thank you so much for being available today.
It's my pleasure, JP. It's great to be here.
Great. Okay. So let's talk about just the basics of Dun Bradstreet as an organization, that's been around, as I said, for quite some time. How do you really kind of mesh, your work with the kind of like the history of the organization and kind of like bring things forward in whatever measured way that you really need?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think everybody may have heard the name Dun Bradstreet, but it's got great brand recognition. But when you ask people, what do you think they do? There's always this kind of, blank stare that comes back, or people will say it's got something to do with creating businesses. But if you go all the way back 186 years, we've been in the data business, collecting data. Back then, someone on a horse would ride into town and take an inventory of who the grocer was and who the blacksmith was and then bring that back and aggregate that information. And while there was no such thing as sort of a data company back then, that's kind of the work that they engaged in. And over the last 186 years, that has continued to progress. It's now on a worldwide stage. We do business in 208 countries around the world, where we collect a lot of sort of more commercial data, right? Real data on businesses, both private and public. But the journey that you referred to of bringing that from where it was over that long period of time till today has been a very exciting journey of really going after modernization and transformation. And there's a couple of key areas that we could probably maybe dig into if you're interested around. We had kind of a weird way that we went about it. We went commercial with our products and services first, and some of the really aggressive technology change. But you can't get there without actually spending the time inside the house, making sure that your teams and the more human element of your organization can get lifted to help you get there. And it's been, for me anyway, it's been an incredible journey here at Dun Bradstreet to do that.
Gotcha. To want to definitely dive more into that journey. We can talk a bit even about when you joined the organization, when you became CTO, and also kind of like what concerns they have. Every organization kind of faces the tech debt, matter that comes in as you're, grabbing different elements as you talked about, and then piling on, and then looking around like, okay, how does all of this work, and meshing that with that history of what might not have been seen as data collection, but then became data collection over time. So where do we start with that? Get us to that the digital age for Dun Bradstreet, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, well, so when I joined, it's about 4.5 years ago now, I made a joke that, the company's 186 years old, and some of our technology might also be 186 years old in terms of that modernization journey. And so when I came in, it was really a bit of an archaeological investigation of how do we do that, thinking about all the parts of the business, both internal IT and technology, as well as our commercial products, and really start digging into the types of technologies that we had, and then start thinking about how do we aggressively, my remit coming in was significant change and transformation, really at the end of the day, modernization of the footprint. And so you have to spend a lot of time up front really digging in and understanding the types of technologies, whether you're talking about mainframe technologies, the company, I would say, was sort of nascently in the cloud at that point in time, but still predominantly anchored in their own traditional data centers and
On-prem.
on-prem, exactly. And so over the last 4.5 years, we've had an incredible journey, and we're now 100% in the cloud with no on-prem anymore. And that journey in the technology side is it's technical. It's building a map of where you start and where we're going to go to, and then how do we get there. Making key strategic partnerships with key vendors and key partners in the industry to help you get there. And it's also about uplifting the talent that you have and getting the appropriate training and bringing the appropriate skill sets in to be able to do that. And so during that journey, you can look at that mostly as an infrastructure journey, at least at the beginning, but you can't make that infrastructure journey without really going in and addressing the tech debt or the heritage, if you will, of the application infrastructures, both internal and external, and modernizing those as well. And so that's really where we spent the last 4.5 years, going in, digging into the technology, really figuring out the roadmaps. What is it going to take to become, more global in nature in terms of our footprint of the products and services that we sell commercially, but as well as supporting the business internationally as well.
Gotcha. Were there guardrails that you felt really needed to kind of be put in place while making this effort, getting this effort in motion for modernization, looking at new technology to adopt, but then at the same time saying, that's nice. However, what we need, or what works best, or what is I'll say the safer road, or what's the appropriate guidance that for your organization that made sense to say, okay, that's a nice shiny new technology, but for our organization, for what we do, these are the guardrails we need to stay within, so we don't just kind of like willy-nilly get things out of control.
Yeah, I think the first step in that journey is an agreement on the standardization. I remember coming in where people are like, "Oh, we're going to go to the cloud. Everything is going to go to the cloud," and that meant there was no standardization on how applications were driven. That means that I could do whatever I want. That means a lot of the historical things, that we were bound by in our own data centers, we were now free to, ignore. And it doesn't. In my experience, I've seen that quite a bit. And so, really establishing the set of standards. I call it the Highlander rule. I'm going to go back probably to the 1980s with the movie The Highlander, right? There can be only one.
I have that on Blu-ray. I understand very well.
There you go. And so with the Highlander rule, and even if it was like maybe two, I'd let it go by, but really about narrowly scoping, what does that end architecture look like? What were the platforms we were going to use? What were the systems? How do I think about code repositories? How do I think about, we had all of the code repositories. I would even probably make the joke, there wasn't a vendor that wasn't successful at selling us something at some point that we never got rid of in the place. Mm-hmm. But when you go towards modernization in that transformation, it's really about getting very focused on what you need to be able to get done and how to get there. And so building, as you called them, the guardrails is incredibly important. And that begins first and foremost with a standardization in terms of approach, a standardization of the types of tools and platforms you're going to use. And then once you can achieve that, or once you can sort of solidify that, you'd find that the speed at which you can make that transformation will continue to increase and get faster and faster and faster, because it's well known. You kind of know where the borders are, and you know where the boundaries are of where to be able to go. And it provides a race lane, if you will, for people to be able to go down that path and drive that modernization. Some people are not going to be into it. Some people are going to hate it. They're not, I want my tool versus your tool. This is a bad tool. But in the end, for the benefit of the business and really to achieve the modernization without all of the drift that can happen, and drift happens everywhere all the time. So if you don't limit the drift, things can become very problematic. And so we went through a lot of learning steps to go through those things as we sort of help define and standardize. But in the end, it has allowed us to move significant amounts of products, services, both internal and external, to the cloud in a pretty rapid fashion, And that includes even things like the launch of all of our AI initiatives, both internal and external as well.
Gotcha. We'll definitely touch more on AI. Before we get to that, just quick follow-up. In the modernization, would you say, if there's a way to quantify this, the data kind of like, I guess, reconciliation, trying to make sure it's all like, in the right format, the unified format going into the cloud. It was more of that being the heavy lift, where the heavy lifting was, or was the heavy lifting more on the side of people? You talked about like wanting the different tools that they're like, but I like this tool, or that looks better, or my cousin said this is cool, I still have my BlackBerry.
Right.
Was it device or the data, or a bit of both when it came to standardization, where the heavy lifting was?
I think the heavy lifting, at least initially, was more cultural internally. Lots of different engineering teams, lots of different product teams, had historically had sort of carte blanche to kind of pick the things that they wanted to do. And to some degree, we allow flexibility in the selection process, just not in the key things that matter. Like if you're going to go deploy something in Kubernetes, which version of Kubernetes is actually not as important, and you can make that decision pretty standard. Say we can standardize on that. Figuring out what the right development platform is, or the right data platform is. You allow some latitude within reason, because your app has to be performant, or the service you're providing has to be performant. So I would say that at least initially, it was a cultural change at first, but then as we started moving faster and faster and faster, there became sort of I'll go back to my analogy, a fast lane that developed on its own that people just got very used to, and that allowed that to speed up. On the data side that you mentioned, we have our business is data. And so when you think about the fact that we ingest, on the order of about 5 exabytes of data every night from around the world on like all different formats, right? You get some stuff in that's sort of API driven. I can make calls. You can bring in stuff that's files. You can, you're dealing with some countries. You're sort of getting files that are unformatted. You get all kinds of things. And so our data ingestion in data business is very complex. The data supply chain, it's a factory unto itself. And so when you talk about the modernization there, it's a modernization at the edge. And as you bring that into more robust, resilient infrastructure, the selection really matters, because you're now having to really worry about 2 things. You're worrying about not just the efficiency of the data architecture and the data infrastructure, but you're also thinking about the fact that there's a geopolitical angle on this, right? How data travels from one country to another country can be highly regulated, or this has to be genericized or anonymized, and increasingly the world is getting really crazy in terms of where data has to be stored, who can store it, who can move it, who can see it. And so because that's our business, and because that's something that we deliver on behalf of our customers on the commercial side, that's a really hard problem, where that standardization I talked about became very key. Being able to deploy those capabilities on a worldwide stage across 200 whatever countries in the world, to make sure that we were sort of ethically compliant to all the rules that we have to be compliant to for our customers, and that was another level of complication that we had to work into this process.
Gotcha. Working with those kind of complications, any number of types of like new trending technology might emerge, as says like going back to the shiny new tech on the block. Has there been trending technology in your tenure that is really proven itself to be relevant to your work? And in converse to that, have there been things, we'll definitely get to AI, but have there been other things that have been, well, just technology fluff, that really didn't help?
It's a great question. I think every I'm at heart a technologist, so I think every technology has its place for doing some things. But I go back and I think about for a while, blockchain was the answer for everything. And
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, you're like, it's a distributed database. There are things that don't work in that model, but everybody tried for a long time to make everything sort of cool and sexy to and it's not that it's not. It absolutely is.
NFTs.
It just doesn't fit every use case. And so I don't know if I would call any of those things fluff. I think there's a lot of exploration on seeing, in some cases, seeing and testing to see if that new technology is a fit or not. I think what a lot of people might see is even just in our one of the interesting things, I think anyway, in our journey is that when we move to more modern architecture, infrastructure, platforms, all these different things, we are moving from a place, that might have been 10 years old or 15 years old in terms of the architecture and thinking and, whatever, CPU processing speeds, et cetera. And when you make these shifts and you really focus on making and becoming, sort of fitting your thing into the new model, we saw incredible uplift in terms of performance. And you could probably come back to me and say, Mike, that's just because you moved from 10 generations hardware to new generations of hardware. It's that for sure. But I think the different paradigms of architecture and thinking about these problems also break up the problem space in different ways that force you to think about architecture in different ways. And so it kind of becomes this self-fulfilling loop of, as you kind of modernize, you start seeing performance gains, you start seeing efficiency gains, and you'll surprise yourself, I think, in that journey. We surprised ourselves in some of the incredible benefits that we got going down that path.
And speaking of efficiency, of course, AI has been at least poster child, at least the presumptive poster child for efficiency for a lot of organizations. Let's talk about what the approach has been for your organization, and something that I'm sure every CTO, CIO out there is looking at is, is there pressure to kind of show that the AI that you are implementing, has some kind of tangible ROI for your organization?
It is. So absolutely. Our journey on the AI path, honestly, is probably a little bit backwards from most of the people maybe listening here today, in that we started on the commercial side first. So we started launching our MCP services and agentic services on the data, good commercial data, feeding that into AI is, I call it the rocket fuel, right? That's what's it's not public models, it's private, highly curated models. So we started there. And sort of backed into a little bit our internal use cases. And interestingly enough, the internal use cases were much harder to sort of get your hands around, right? Commercially, we could scope it and focus it a little bit easier. But when you get into really deploying AI and building those use cases, it's hard. It's hard for a couple of reasons. One, by and large, I would say 90 to 95% of the internal data sources within an organization are probably not ready to be ingested by AI in a usable fashion. And so as you go through that process, making sure that your SharePoint sites or your Confluence sites, that the data there is ready to be ingested. And it's not even just ready to be ingested. Even if it's ready to be ingested, is the data there something you want to be exposed to an internal use case, right? So a lot of companies, especially over a long time, they might have PII data, or they might have hidden customer data, or they might have other things that are in there that as soon as you open that up to that kind of platform, you're opening up all kinds of other risks into the business. And so a lot of my friends in the industry are running into that challenge now, but really building that use case and really understanding it and making that use case pencil out mathematically or from a finance perspective, unless you're dealing with large numbers, can become very difficult. You can get help by uplifting your team. And when I say your team, it's not just your technology people. If you really want to get the best proverbial bang for the buck, you have to lift up the entire organization and give them exposure to AI platforms. And you start them small, you give them the education, you give them champions, you build internal centers of excellence. And then over time, the rising tide starts to lift all of those things. And I guess maybe I'll conclude this question anyway. I feel like I'm going long for you. Is that as you think about this kind of change, I think a lot of people had these expectations for this revolutionary change by bringing this in. And I don't think it works that way. I think when you bring this kind of technology in, and if you empower everybody, there's evolutionary change that's happening at sort of micro and smaller scales. Maybe it's departmental. They're making, I can build that a little bit faster. I've taken my job and making it 5% better this week because I've taken out some steps. I think the big revolutionary changes come from stepping back and looking at all the little evolutionary changes and being able to group them in a way that shows really significant movement. And I think that's been our journey so far internally on the internal AI journey.
Gotcha. I'm definitely looking forward to see what kinds of impact and change and further evolution we see, not only on the bigger AI market, but what also happens with you at Dun Bradstreet. Listen, Michael, you have been fantastic. I really appreciate your time and your insight and a look at what you do within your organization. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a great time.